Hey now, friends, it is me, Lola, and you are listening to The Smoking Prophet. So, I just listened to an interview that's got my wheels turning, and I was taking notes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these notes are so good. The nuggets that were being dropped in the conversation were just so amazing. And I was like, I got to come on live and share them with y'all. So that's what I'm doing. So again, it's me, Lola. I'm with the Smoking Prophet. The Smoking Prophet is a life advice brand designed to resource you spiritually, creatively, and socially. Our goal is to give you what it takes others years to get. And we do that through a blog, thesmokingprofit.com, and also through an amazing podcast, the Smoking Prophet Podcast. We have 100 plus episodes available on the Prophet Podcast. So be sure to go and find, subscribe, and follow our podcast. Share it with your friends. Share it with someone you want to see you went. Share it with, my goodness, I got tongue tied. Share it with someone that you want to see win today. Okay. So let me go ahead and get into it. I was listening to this interview from the Breakfast Club. And for those of you all that don't know what the Breakfast Club is, it's actually a radio show. It has three main hosts and it has a ton of different people that come on there and they share what they're doing, they share what's going on, and it's pretty cool. So I saw this interview pop up on my YouTube timeline earlier, and I was like, okay, I want to watch this interview because I know who Mark Cuban is. Like, I've read about him in books. Like, for people that watch Shark Tank, y'all are probably some fans of Mark Cuban. You may know him from like basketball, but anyways, I was like, I know who Mark Cuban is, and I want to like look at this interview. I didn't know who the other guy was, but I found out about him today, and he's pretty amazing. His name is Noel Durity. So maybe I mispronounced it. Is Duriti, Durity or dirty? I don't know, like the nature of where his name came from. So I could be saying it like really, really wrong. And if I am, I'm so sorry. So let me see here. Let me know as you're coming on, one, if you can hear me okay, and if everything is good. There is not going to be any video today. It's just straight up audio. So that's all you're going to get. But let me go ahead and get into this interview here. So I was listening to the interview, and at first I was just kind of like listening, and I was like, I'm not going to take notes. And I had my headphones on and I was moving around and just doing little stuff. And then I was like, no, let me pull out like my notebook and a piece of paper and take some notes from this interview. So, again, the Breakfast Club was interviewing Mark Cuban and this guy, Noel Durity, which is the creator of Twist Up Comb. And it's like a comb for people with curly hair, people with afros, and it just makes doing hair a lot easier, and it's sanitary, and it's a pretty cool like idea that he came up with and built. Now you're probably wondering, well, why was Mark Cuban there? Mark Cuban was there because he actually invested in this guy's product, and they came to know each other, were introduced through the show Shark Tank. Noel Durity like pitched his idea on Shark Tank. So at the 28:08 minute mark, there was some advice that was given for like new entrepreneurs, and I believe DJ Envy asked the question like, what advice would Noel give to new entrepreneurs? And he said this, and I thought this was really cool. Noel's response was, there's no shortcuts. Do the work. Do the work. There is some type of confidence that comes in doing the work, unquote. And that was at the 28-minute and 35-second mark. But when I heard that, I thought that was so cool because there's this whole need for like instant gratification. And people like, we're so obsessed with getting what we see immediately and like having it now. But this guy was like, do the work because something beautiful happens when you do the work. When you do the work, he says there is some type of, quote, confidence that comes in doing the work, unquote. And I totally like connected with that. There's a difference in believing you can do something and actually doing it and knowing you can do it and knowing you can repeat it and knowing you can get results. It does give you a real big sense of confidence. So I thought that that was cool. That was like the first quote that I saw, and I thought it was just amazing. Something else that I instantly picked up on from this interview was Mark Cuban's outlook as an investor, and even looking at Noel and considering him and deciding how deciding the extent of their relationship based on what Noel was doing. So around the 6 minute mark, yeah, I think this is around like the 6 minute mark, Mark Cuban and Noel Durity talk about a story of them meeting and how they met at a hotel and they were just talking outside. And Mark Cuban said that the first thing that he picked up on was the type of hotel that Noel was staying at. It wasn't a 5-star hotel. It wasn't like a beat down hotel, but it wasn't like the greatest hotel. That was like the first thing. And then the second thing that he mentioned during this Breakfast Club interview was that Noel's car wasn't the best car. Like the car wouldn't start because the battery went dead. So that was like the second thing that Mark Cuban mentioned. And he actually referred to these things as being good signs. He said that they were good signs. And here's the quote that Mark Cuban gave when referring to Noel. And this explains why Mark Cuban called these two things good signs, two things being Noel staying at an inn that wasn't super expensive, and also Noel having a car that wasn't like the best car. And this is at the 8 minute and 34 second mark. So he says here, I love this guy. We're going to do business forever because he is putting his money in the right spot. So this is why Mark Cuban referred to the things that Noel was doing as good signs, because it shows that he was more interested in taking the money that he was getting from an investor and the money that may have been coming in from his business and putting it where it mattered versus taking the money to and spending it on some sort of temporary comfort or for instant gratification or even to look good, and I thought that that was really cool. Again, it just points back to sometimes people, and any of us can do this, we get our priorities mixed up. So that was like the second thing that I got from this interview. The first thing was a quote from Noel Durity where he said, do the work. There is some type of confidence that comes in doing the work. And then the second point, the second thing that I got from this interview was from Mark Cuban's observation as an investor of Noel Durity's product. He was like, the fact that he was putting his money in the right spot were good signs. And so I thought that was cool. And a question that I drew from all of that is like, where are we putting our money? How are we prioritizing their money? So those were like two main quotes. And then Angela Yee asked a good question. So she's one of the other hosts of the Breakfast Club. And this is at the 9 minute and 24 second mark. The question that she asked was, when do you decide it's time for me to pay myself? So for entrepreneurs, visionaries, leaders, builders, if you're asking yourself, when do you need to pay yourself? When is the right time? I know that's a question that anyone is going to have. Money matters, right? Mark Cuban's response was depends. And if you go and listen to this interview, you can find his response at the 9 minute and 34 second mark. He said, depends. Do you have another job? And Mark Cuban went on to say that at the beginning of his career as an American entrepreneur and growing into this billionaire, this business owner, this TV personality, before all of the good stuff came, at the beginning of his career, he was like working a night job. I think he said he was bartending. He was staying in an apartment with 6 guys. He was sleeping on the floor. He was buying used suits. He even mentioned buying used polos and stuff like that. So he was just like, it depends. And something that he mentioned is that quitting a job, quitting your day job, quitting the job you have is not like is not necessary to prove that you're committed to entrepreneurship or committed to whatever you're building. And he said that to say, like, I was still working when I went into all of this, and what kind of pushed me in it was being fired. And then he referenced Noel, and he said Noel, like, still had his job until he knew that he was set to leave and he was in a good place to be able to leave and to go off into entrepreneurship. So I thought that that was great. So far I've gone over like 3 points. I'm going to recap the first 2 points really quickly. I'm listening to this Breakfast Club interview, and it's with Noel Durity and Mark Cuban. I know who Mark Cuban is. Didn't know who Noel was, but he is the creator of Twisted Up Comb, and it's a really cool product. But anyways, the first quote is advice to new entrepreneurs. And this quote is from Noel. He says, "There's no shortcuts. Do the work. Do the work. There is some type of confidence that comes in doing the work." And that was at the 28-minute and 35-second mark, which I could totally relate to that. I understand that when I do something, it gives me confidence. And the more I do it, the more confidence I have. Even me thinking about this now, I'm thinking about the number, about 10,000 hours of deliberate practice leads to expertise. But like, the more you do something, the more confident you do become. And there are no shortcuts. You know, we're in love with this idea of instant gratification, but the truth is, it's usually doesn't happen like that. A lot of people that you see come up and that you see doing amazing things, like, they've been working really hard for a long time, and maybe you didn't know that because you didn't know them, and now all of a sudden they have this exposure, which reminds me of like things that I'm just seeing and realizing. There are so many people that are like posing like they have everything, and I'm like, based on the research about I'm like, based on research and statistics, like, half of y'all don't move the way you say you move, according to research that you can pull up on places like Pew Research Center. But anyways, the second quote that I got was Mark Cuban's outlook on Noel as an investor, and things that Mark Cuban referred to as good signs from Noel. And one thing was Noel staying at an inn versus a five-star hotel, resort, whatever. And also Noel having a car that wasn't like the best car. It was a car where they were meeting, Mark Cuban and Noel were meeting in front of this inn that Noel was staying at. And they were talking outside, and then Noel's car wouldn't start. And I believe Noel mentioned it was a rental or something, but Mark Cuban just referred to those things as good signs because it showed that Noel was putting his money in the right places and not putting his money into something that didn't matter. So I thought that that was really, really, really cool. And then the third takeaway that I had from this interview was Angela Yee asking Mark Cuban, like, when do you when do you decide it's time for you to pay yourself? And Mark Cuban's response was, it really depends. And that quitting your job was not like necessary to validate or prove your belief and your commitment to your entrepreneurial journey. And I just summed that up in my own words, or what I took from that. So that is not the exact quote of what Mark Cuban said, but you can find his quote at the 9-minute and 34-second mark. So I thought that that was really cool. And then this was something else that Mark Cuban said. And he was reinforcing Noel's statement and his point of like, you have to do the work with whatever you're doing, whatever commitment you have, whatever you're setting your mind to, you have to like do the work. You can't just show up and think it's over. So this is for like any entrepreneur, any builder, any visionary. I'll give you the quote. This is at the 30-minute and I think 17-second mark. Noel was exactly right. You got to do the work, right? It's not like, okay, I'm starting a business, now it gets easy. No, it's the exact opposite. Like I tell everybody, you've got to work like someone's out there trying to kick your ass all day, every day. And I was like, oh my gosh, just the smallest statement in that was just such a refreshing thing to hear. Mark Cuban said, it's not like, okay, I'm starting a business, now it gets easy. And isn't that what some people think? Like, I've started a business, I put myself out there, and now I'm supposed to be selling stuff. And it's like, no, like the journey just begun. Like the hard work is really, really starting on if you'll survive, if you will be emotionally stable enough to withstand the pressure and to continue, while you're building and while you're trying to make things happen. And then if your business is going to survive. So I thought that that was an interesting statement. And then Mark Cuban went on to say that business is the ultimate sport. And as he was talking, he was mentioning like his his perspective as a leader as an owner of like a team, a basketball team, and what it's like with his players. He's like, with his players, they play a basketball game and they know how long they have to be up against their opponent. But with entrepreneurship, with business, it's different. It's all day, every day. It's 365 days a year. It's no days off. It's no breaks. And then he's like, the worst thing is that you don't know your competition until they come. Like, you don't even know who your competition is until they're competing with you. So his advice is like, man, you just gotta be super competitive. And I was like, that is so cool, right? Okay. And then something else that I pulled from this interview is be brutally honest with yourself. And that was a quote from Mark Cuban at the 31-minute and 29-second mark. He said to be brutally honest with yourself. I mean, how many of us are not completely honest with ourselves? Or worse, we're afraid to ask other people for feedback because the lie we've been living in our heads might be found out. Someone asked me the other day if I ask people for feedback, and I'm like, yes, I ask people for feedback. I pay for feedback. Like, I absolutely do that. I don't want to be living in this fantasy fairy tale world in my head, and my reality is never able to come to the place of my fantasy because I won't be honest with myself. So when Mark Cuban said, be brutally honest with yourself, I thought about that. And that advice does not just apply to like entrepreneurs, it applies to like leaders, it applies to so many different things. Be brutally honest with yourself. And okay, so I got like three more quotes. And this one is about social media. I thought this was really, really cool. And so around the 30-minute and 25-second mark, they switched the tone and started talking about like social media because DJ Envy told Mark Cuban he looks like a coach that would like cuss at a player and then say, give me a hug, like just being more tough with people. And Mark Cuban was like, you can't do that now. He's like, you can't do that now. He's like, social media has messed with people's sensitivity levels and it's different. And he's like, how I talk to my players maybe in 2010 is not how I was able to talk to them in 2015 and not how I was able to talk to them in 2020. So I thought that that was so cool. And then this was a quote that Mark Cuban gave, and it was the dopest quote ever. This is at the 35-minute and 22-second mark. It said, people who are visible are very vulnerable, meaning people who have high levels of exposure and visibility, news, internet, social media, spotlight, public, that kind of stuff. So let me go back to the quote. It says, people who are visible are very vulnerable. And people who are making the comments get a lot of courage to say anything that they haven't earned. Now you may be asking yourself, what does that mean? And my interpretation of the first part is very clear. People who are visible are very vulnerable. People who have more time in the spotlight. They're more vulnerable because they have a lot more people sharing their opinions about them. And sometimes the opinions we share about people, let's be honest, they are private thoughts that we really should be thinking about and filtering a little bit better versus just blurting out and sharing because there's opportunity to share them. I think a lot of us get in trouble because we're sharing private opinions publicly. Like sometimes when you have a thought in your head, if you would just filter that through yourself, you might find on your own that, hey, I don't need to say this, or wait a minute, I just figured that out, and maybe the way that I'm seeing it doesn't take into account some other factors that are very, very relevant. So I think one problem is we don't need to say as much as we do. But the second part of Mark Cuban's quote says, and people who are making the comments get a lot of courage to say anything that they haven't earned. They haven't earned, meaning you have a lot of people sharing their opinions, and the people that are sharing their opinions don't necessarily have experience to sit in that seat and give their opinions. And Mark Cuban referenced like people saying like you need to sell the team and do this, and his response to that could be, well, have you ever owned a team? Do you even understand the magnitude of what I'm doing? And he didn't say that. Those are my words. I'm giving my elaboration and commentary on it, but I just thought that that quote was cool and what he pointed out. So people, this is Mark Cuban's quote, people who are visible are very vulnerable. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. The last two things that I have here is Mark Cuban just saying that we have to keep innovating and we have to be agile. And that was at the 39-minute and 23-second mark. We have to keep innovating and we have to be agile. And as I was listening to this entire interview, like I was making notes of what I thought to myself. And one of the notes I made to myself is like, our approach always has to evolve because everything is evolving. And in the time that we're living in, we've been forced into a more fast paced evolution that maybe we didn't want. We've been forced into a more aggressive revolution, being, the whole situation that happened and our worlds being rocked upside down. But before that even started, we have technology that's just elevating things and just swiftly changing things. Like I'm just looking at so much stuff that I see unfolding from different companies and with AI and all of that. So it's like things are changing. So Mark Cuban said, keep innovating, be agile. And what is being agile? Being agile is being able to pivot and being able to turn on a whim. And when I use that word pivot, it reminds me of like this book that I'm reading. And the book is talking about like businesses and startups and that kind of stuff, and how businesses like have to be able to jump curves. And that means that they have to be able to pivot. They have to be able to shift according to what they see and to like skip steps ahead of what everybody else is doing. And I just thought that that was really, really cool. Okay. And here is the last quote that I got. And this is from the 42-minute and 13-second mark. It says, this quote comes from Mark Cuban. And Mark Cuban says, the closer you are to your customer, the better business you can build. So I thought that that was cool. I'm going to write these quotes down and like put them up on my wall and look at them daily and really, really just think about how I can apply these things to what I'm building and what I'm doing. Let me go back over these quotes with you. So let me tell you what I was doing again. I was minding my business when I saw a new interview pop up on my YouTube timeline. And I was like, oh, let me add that to my watch later list. I finally found the time and I was like, let me watch this interview and listen to it because I know who Mark Cuban is. I've read about him. Like I follow a investor on Instagram who received funding from him, like $5 million, which is pretty cool. And like she's dope. I'm reading her book now. Well, listening to her book now too. But anyways, I saw that Mark Cuban was on there. And then there's this guy, Noel Durity. Come to find out, Mark Cuban invested in Noel Durity's company, his product, excuse me, and it was a dope idea. Twist up comb. And it's like this comb that is used for like curly hair. It's very niche. It's used for curly hair, short hairstyles, afro like hair, and it just makes doing hair easier. And I'm like, that is so cool. So the first quote I actually got from Noel Durity, and the quote is, "There's no shortcuts. Do the work. Do the work. There is some type of confidence that comes in doing the work." And the timestamp for this quote was the 28-minute, 35-second mark. The second takeaway that I got from this interview was based on a quote by Mark Cuban. And Mark Cuban was talking about Noel Durity. And in this quote, he says, "I love this guy. We're going to do business forever because he is putting his money in the right spot." And that was at the 8-minute and 42-second mark. And what Mark Cuban was referring to was a story that took place between the 6-minute and 16-second mark to around like the 8-minute mark. But the story was about Mark Cuban seeing good signs from Noel, where Noel was staying at a an inn that wasn't like super expensive. It wasn't a 5-star hotel, and also where Noel wasn't like trying to get like the best cars. Noel had a rental car, I believe it was a rental, and the car wouldn't start. So he's like, this guy is putting his money in the right spot because he's not spending it on stuff that is not necessarily going to get him a return. And as an investor, I'm excited about that, especially I just gave this guy this money. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so that was the second quote. I thought that that was cool. I took a lot from that. And then the third takeaway I got was Mark Cuban's response to Angela Yee when she asked, "When do you decide it's time to pay yourself as an entrepreneur, as a business owner?" And Mark Cuban was like, "It depends." And that you quitting your job is not a sign that you believe in your entrepreneurial journey. It's not a sign of your commitment. And I thought that that was really cool. You can find that around the 9-minute and 34-second mark. Let's see here. And around the 30-minute and 17-second mark, Mark Cuban reaffirmed what Noel said about doing the work by saying, "Noel was exactly right. You got to do the work, right? It's not like, okay, I'm starting a business. Now it gets easy." No, it's the exact opposite. Like I tell everybody, you've got to work like someone's out there trying to kick your ass all day, every day. And I love that quote specifically because Mark Cuban is like, it's not like I'm starting a business now, everything is about to get easy. Everything is about to fall in my lap. No, that's not what's about to happen. Like now is when the hard work begins. So I thought that that realization was nice, as in your face and honest as it was. Something else that Mark Cuban also said was that business is the ultimate sport at the 30-minute and 35-second mark. And he's been saying that for a while. And also that we have to be brutally honest with ourselves. He said at the 31-second and 29-minute mark, be brutally honest with yourself. That's what Mark Cuban said. So I thought that that was perfect to remember. And then let's wrap up here with the last quote that I thought was just the best. At the 42-minute and 13-second mark, Mark Cuban said, "The closer you are to your customer, the better business you can build." And that can just go so many ways. But he was thinking about, like, he was talking about building businesses out, like at a local level, regional level, national level, and international level. It was a good interview. I enjoyed it. If any one of you all like listens to the interview and you pulled some good quotes from it, then drop a comment and let me know. Also, if you have any good interviews you've listened to lately that are inspiring and that you're able to pull something from and learn something that can help to make your life better, your life easier, or something in your life happened that hasn't already happened, then please let me know. I am Lola. Thanks for listening. I'm with the Smoking Prophet. The Smoking Prophet is a life advice brand designed to resource you spiritually, creatively, and socially. Our goal is to give you what it takes others years to get. And we do that through a blog and also a podcast, the smokingprophet.com, and also the Smoking Prophet podcast. The Smoking Prophet podcast has over 100 episodes. So please be sure to find us, follow us, subscribe to us, and share the Smoking Prophet podcast today. Until next time, I hope y'all have the most amazing life. Bye.